Hey everybody, I'm Dane Sanders and I want to welcome you to Fast Track Coaching. This is a weekly podcast that we've been doing for almost 3 years now, every week, consistently, around having guests on that have helped me push the conversation. Certainly they've helped me on a personal and professional level, but hopefully we've helped each other as a community to push the limits on what we can do creatively and what we can do in business. And the point of this show isn't to solve all the problems that you might have or that I might have, but to really push the conversation further and to get one or two or three little things that you get inspired by, take action with this week, and then join us again next time. And today is no exception. Kenna Klosterman is a photographer, and many of you guys know her not only for her work, but also for her work with this little startup up in Seattle called Creative Live, you might have heard of. And Kenna is, I know technically you're a host and internet woman and internet person, I should say. Not internet girl. I have three girls and I'm not calling
Yeah, I don't think that'd be good.
No, not going to work. But my point is you do a lot of things for Creative Live. And before I even get to all that, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dane. Pleasure to be here. Really excited to be here.
Cool. Well, as you know, because we talked offline before we started the show, and for those of you who are at home, the reason I wanted to have Kenna on is the more I'm in conversations with folks who create platforms for conversation beyond ourselves, whether it be something as big as Creative Live or the lynda.coms or the Kelbys or whatever they are that are out there, even Better Together and Fast Track. These are efforts to build community. They're efforts to have particular focus around expanding what we know technically or artistically, and really to take advantage and leverage the tools that we have available to us now that weren't available before to expedite the process. And as I've been in conversation, in fact, just yesterday I was up in Santa Barbara and I was hanging out with Chris Orwig I spoke at Brooks, and we were talking about his work with Linda, and it's just amazing how much ground is being taken in such unique patterns and directions, and Creative Live is no exception. And having Kenna on, Kenna, you have had a really unique perspective, because it's not just in building the platform. Obviously, you've been building your own photo business for some time, and you've come up with a very unique angle or kind of portfolio of business life for yourself that
Right.
involves both kind of full-time work with Creative Live and also, I'm guessing, another full-time job with your photography. And you're not alone.
Right.
And I thought it would be fun to have a conversation around the art of finding your way. I think that there's just a lot of photographers who are listening here and well beyond that are wrestling with how do I fit in this ecosystem called the photo industry, and what are my contributions and so forth. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, just off the top of your head, a little of your journey to get to here. And then I have a bunch of questions I want to ask from there. So
Awesome. And I would love to also talk about, in that mix, what Creative Live is, because there are many people out there that aren't familiar with Creative Live.
that's not possible.
It is possible.
No, there's no one. Everyone knows.
True.
Okay, so go ahead.
So, okay, but I'll fit that in. With regard to my story, is that I was a photographer at heart since the typical since high school, black and white darkroom, and my first job out of undergrad was actually working for two fine art photographers in rural Pennsylvania, and that scared the heck out of me as a young 21-year-old. Seeing what the life of an artist, of a starving artist, is, and people who are very successful, books published, collected by galleries all over the world, but still didn't know when their next paycheck was coming.
Yeah.
And so I actually then took a totally different route, and it took about, many years to come back around to having photography be my career. So through there, working for startups, I ended up going to graduate school for business, and kind of that trajected me into this corporate world as a brand marketer, and just realized after a number of years that was not the path for me, and quit my job, quit a series of large company jobs, actually, till I realized that it was not them, it was me. That the cubicle thing is not for me. But I then left the country and traveled around the world for a year photographing. My dream as a kid had always been to be a National Geographic photographer traveling. And so I wasn't working for National Geographic, but I was traveling and just expanding my horizons of the world. And my style of photography, my passion for photography is really around the documentary style. I studied anthropology in undergrad, and so that just it comes all together. So after quitting my last corporate job and deciding I'm going to do this, I'm going to go be a professional photographer full time, I found a couple of free classes online. It was actually through a tweet from our local camera store, Glazers. Shout out to Glazers, I'm forever indebted. And I found out about these classes that were free. I needed to learn post-production. I needed to learn lighting. I went to this thing called Creative Live, and there was like 4 of us there. And wow, free classes. And fast forward 2.5 years later, and I am now, like you said, the host of Creative Live, which is an online virtual classroom. We reach people in every continent around the world, and we're bringing the best educators online to teach people for free during our live events in the world of photography and design and film. So over the course of time, I've been a volunteer, a chat host, community builder, doing social media, as well as helping with the curriculum, with the photography curriculum, and helping select instructors and working with those instructors to create great educational programs. So I am honored to be a part of the small team at Creative Live, and have just a ton of gratitude that my life took all these little turns, and I am still finding my way. But that is my story today.
Well, there's something pretty profound, especially in that last piece, when you're describing, these seemingly disparate, meaning distinct events or circumstances in your life, these contributors, your life resume, that everyone, I believe, has this kind of unique set of twists and turns that no one plotted out to go through. But especially as a professional creative, it seems like all my friends have those kinds of stories.
That's right. That's right.
And they're trying to, it's almost like they're playing a game of Tetris, where they're trying to make it all fit into a little box at the bottom and do it quickly before, it goes over the top. And
I was horrible at that game.
Well, based on results, I'm not sure you're doing it pretty well. But my point is that for the folks that are at home who do have these really unique set of crazy circumstances, and both the pressures of feeling this need to create, to influence others, to tell stories, to change the world with their craft and their art, and these real pressures of, I have to pay the bills. Those folks in rural Pennsylvania that you described, they're not just in rural Pennsylvania. They're everywhere on the internet that are learning all these different things. And let's say that those folks at home who have those crazy kind of life resume listed things don't have an opportunity to go on the small staff at Creative Live. What advice would you give to begin the process of mapping out, your particular narrative? And there's an assumption in my question. The assumption is that there's something in my life's resume that would point me in a constructive direction. But maybe that assumption is false. Tell me what you think.
Well, if we're talking about somebody who is trying to decide whether they want to be a professional photographer, is that kind of what we're talking about?
Maybe. Let's even go further. Like they have decided that they want to be a professional photographer, but they're trying to find a unique mix. And some of the subtext of what we're describing is, gosh, there's no one way. There's no normal trajectory anymore. Like, I'm going to go, like that LA or New York Times piece a couple of years ago, where the guy, the upstart golden child, said, I went the traditional route. went to PJ school, and then I got an internship, and then I got a staff stringer job, and then I kind of moved up, and now I'm a photographer for the Wall Street Journal or for the New York Times or for wherever he was. And I don't think there's any viability in that, because he was going head to head with the woman who was a part-time mom, part-time photographer who got a contract with Corbis or something.
Right.
And like, there is no traditional route. So if there's no traditional route and I have to choose my own adventure with my life's resume on it, how do I do it?
Yeah, right. So, gosh, I think there are a number of things that go into that. And if I use myself as an example, or I have, again, had the honor of interacting with many instructors at Creative Live, and even more of photographers who have come not only to be in our studio audience, but just that I've interacted with online.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to, well, first of all, there's like the personal work. So becoming confident in, no matter if it's photography or anything else, but to be able to put yourself out there and want it, and to feel valuable as a photographer, as a professional. There's that aspect of having to be whole in yourself, I guess, and so that's like the personal side. Then there's the technical side, if you will, and you've got to know your stuff. While we talk a lot about the business of photography being 80 to 90% business and 10% technique, you still have to know how to be a photographer, in my opinion. And so if you don't, if you still have a lot of learning to do, as I did when I made this decision, and I went out like, ooh, I really need to be a better post-processor to call myself a pro. I was the old, I'm a natural light photographer because I didn't know how to use studio lighting.
Right.
And so there's the technical aspect of it, and everybody is starting in different places, obviously on that side, whether you've picked up a camera as a 12-year-old, or you're just picking one up as an adult. One of those first photographers that I worked for out of school, she had been a painter, and she had kind of found her love for photography in her early 40s. So it's definitely not something that you do have to go to school for, or that you do have to have been doing for 20 years. That's kind of the really cool thing about the art form. And then there's the work. So I think similar to like having the confidence and creating this desire in yourself, then there's you need to do the work. And so I think that's where it comes in, that everybody has a different path and story, but it's identifying, let's say, your network of whether that's people that you know, or the 6 degrees of separation. It's building community. It's doing the research. But I think I did a lot of sort of working with a coach to try to identify what skills I already had in my own life, from whatever background I was coming from a business background and marketing background, and then how all of those little pieces can fit together towards the business that I wanted to go into at the time.
That's great. So you actually brought a business coach on?
I did.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing a couple things. One is the process of identifying kind of a path, or the art of kind of finding your way, has at least personal, technical, and actually getting work aspects to it, or kind of facets to it. And if I'm going to develop my person, some of that is confidence, and the roadmap to confidence is putting yourself out there, like facing your fears. Is that a fair kind of summation?
I absolutely think so. I think that the fear of failure the fear of not being perfect, the fear of being judged or criticized. Like, these are all the things that that are blockers, and certainly have been for me. And that's what we love at Creative Live, is the students who, the participants who choose to make a video. For those who aren't familiar, we select our studio audience by people submitting videos saying, I want to come be in this workshop and this is why. And just the act of putting yourself out there for those people, even that alone, whether you're chosen or not, is kind of taking this step and taking a leap to overcoming some fears. And yeah.
Okay, so for the people who say, yeah, but it's really hard to overcome my fears, it's really hard to put yourself out there, what do you say to them?
Yes. This is globally true, and yet people do it. So then it's looking at what are the traits of people who do it, and what are the things that have made them successful. And
so it would be fair to say, and I'm in agreement with you on this, it'd be fair to say that if you're not willing to put yourself out there, you probably shouldn't do this work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. That doesn't mean to be said that if you're not putting yourself out there right now, that you can't learn to do that. Because
but until you are putting yourself out there, you aren't doing the work.
Correct.
That's required. So you got to look for results, not just intentions. Like, oh, I'd like to someday, or maybe, or hopefully, or...
Absolutely. And that's, we talk a lot about, it's one thing to be inspired, and it's another thing to actually act upon that inspiration. Yeah. So that comes to having to do the work. And you know, there's a lot of great books out there, and people to look at, and blogs to read, and all of that. But to see, it comes down to, in my mind, not just like thinking about what you want to do and setting intentions, because I'm all about that. I'm all about manifesting things in your life by not only setting those intentions, but then the practical methods behind that. Not just I think it and then it's going to happen. I have the idea and then it's going to happen. But the practical steps that you need to take to make that, because that is how anything happens. Is
That's right.
You do it.
Yeah, it's funny. Are you familiar with Stephen Pressfield?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you seen his new?
It's referring to.
That's weird. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're not familiar with him, when you're at home and you're watching, there's a couple of his books. The kind of his signature one was the War of Art. And then he had kind of some mini versions that he did for Seth Godin. One's called Do the Work, and the other one that just came out like a week ago, I think, is called Go Pro.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it just came out. It's a little one of those mini ones that Seth is doing through his Domino project. But all that said, if you haven't heard of Steve Pressfield, like run, don't walk, and get one of these books and prepare to have your behind kicked, because he's basically, it's like a double dog dare to say, look, you're kidding yourself if you're not going to step up and be a professional and do what's required to put yourself in a position to find your way. And what isn't the case in this conversation, I'm confident, both I think Ken and I agree on this, it's not going to be done for you.
Correct.
There is an action that is required, and the action is in the physical universe true. Like a Martian can come down and point to it and say, "Yep, that's where it is. There's action happening." And if a Martian came down and looked at your life right now and they couldn't say, "There it is," guess what? It's not there. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
All right. So if that's on the personal side, then you have the technical side. Obviously, you've had a ton of exposure with Creative Live and all the instructors. People who are both teaching what they've practiced. They're learned, but they're learned not only theoretical, but in kind of the school of hard knocks and blue collar photographer out in the real world making it happen.
Right.
You know, it's one thing to.
Yeah, I mean, working professionals and educators. Yeah.
Right. So, and you also mentioned, I think, an important insight that I think a lot of folks, it's surprising to me, but it still gets lost on a lot of folks, that there's a disproportionate amount of effort spent on, 1/10 of our work, which is the technical aspect of it, but it's the most important 10th of our work. Because if we can't do the work of photography, then we should do something else. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Unless you're going to outsource that part of it, which means you're just building your CEO of somebody else's photo company. But in that, it seems like there's no end to technical learning, which is great job security for Creative Live, but and clearly the results of the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who've been tuning in to things like Creative Live. It bears witness to how much people want desperately to learn the technical aspects of things. So given that as a backdrop, when you think about, and maybe this is a false comparison, but the first of doing the work and the second of learning the technique, would you put one over the other?
Well, actually, what I've been thinking as you've just been setting that up is that even learning the technique comes down to doing the work, because to be honest with you, Dane, I have sat through probably
a few hours,
probably 60 or 60 plus 70 maybe workshops, and I have been exposed to a lot of technical information. Doesn't mean I know how to do it. Right. In order to know how to do it, in order to master those techniques, whether it's lighting, whether it's your camera, whether it's posing, you have to do the work. You have to practice. Yeah. And there are a number of areas that, again, I've sat through so many hours of education on that I still can't say that that's an expertise of mine, because I haven't gone out there and practiced. So in terms of it's all kind of combined together in my mind.
Well, it's fun. What you're reminding me of is I can think of a number of times where I studied philosophy in grad school, and I remember getting in conversations with people at proverbial cocktail parties where they'll say, "What did you study in school?" And I'll say, "I studied philosophy," and they'll say, "Oh, I read Plato as an undergrad," and awkward pause, and there's some kind of equation here, oh, you're a photographer. Oh, I have a really nice camera, or and I'm not trying to say that in a cynical way. I understand from their perspective, they're saying, "Wow, I'd like to connect and relate," and really that's what that's about, I suspect, in most cases. And at the same time, there's a sense in which I can see how people who sit in on a Creative Live for a long weekend with whoever and get out the other side and go, "Gosh, I sure feel like I learned something." Not that I haven't learned it, but that I have something in me because it washed over me. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So how do you encourage folks to go and do after they swam in the bath for the weekend? Right.
So, because this is something that Craig Swanson, who is the founder, co-founder, yay, Craig, who is also just a brilliant life coach and businessman and entrepreneur, but he talked about how, a lot of people use taking a workshop or even setting goals for yourself as an excuse or as thinking that you've done something. Right. So yes, learning, again, is part of that, and that's a necessary step. Yeah. But just because you've, again, learned and taken that in, it's not actually doing it. And so what I love about Creative Live is the community that we're building and the networking that we're building for people to share and encourage and inspire each other after these workshops. Yeah. If you are, say, with Facebook, there are Creative Live groups where people have started on their own. For any given workshop, usually the set of students that are in person will build their own little Facebook group in order to continue the conversation, because it certainly doesn't stop there. Right. And so I think that is what I would encourage especially people who are earlier on in their careers, is that community. There's so many communities out there online, but then there's also the personal connections that you can make in person in your local area, which again goes back to the hands-on type stuff that gets you out there doing versus just talking about things.
Yeah.
I know Craig has said that, like, I think there's some studies that literally in your brain, when you verbalize...
You can't tell the difference. It's physiologically indifferent.
Which trips me out.
Yeah. Yeah. In case you guys aren't at home, if you're not familiar with what Ken is describing, is based on results, there is no physiological difference between the imagination of doing something and doing something. It's why you can wake up from a dream and feel like, oh my gosh, that was so real. Tell me what's really happening, kind of thing. And it's not that your body has just, they're firing all the pistons to have that experience of that happened, even though it didn't happen. Right. And that's why the measuring stick of the real world really is critical, because you can trick yourself. And this is dangerous work in an industry where there's no barrier to entry, and you can put yourself into a position where if you get the work, which is what I want to go to in a minute, if you get the work, that you don't want to, you want to find that sweet spot of where you actually are and stretch it as far as you can go. And I really appreciate what you're saying, Ken, about the idea of not just, what we're talking about is implementation, and the idea of not just having that virtual experience where you're kind of connecting on a Facebook group, but stretching beyond it. It's one of, I think, within our community, one of the things that we really became clear on our leadership was, and we're just a grassroots deal, but our leadership became really clear that the biggest gap in education was implementing, because there was no shortage of learning. And as a result, I think we have like 3,000 people in different local groups meeting every month, and all over the place, and we have common content. But the content's irrelevant. Like, I know, because I make it. It's really the content is just instrumental to them going and doing something in the context of community. And the hope is that we're better together than we are in isolation.
Right. Exactly. And there's a new Seattle group, which is very exciting.
There is a new Seattle group. That's right. So all that's, gosh, there's so much I want to talk about here, and we're short on time, so you're gonna have to come back. Okay, so in the spirit of this conversation of the art of finding your way, we've already talked a little bit around things like the personal. We've talked about the technical, talking about making it real, and I'm going to come back to this on the very end of this again on if it's not showing up real, or you're not committed to have it show up for real, save yourself a lot of grief and just go someplace else. Like, go do something else. But by the way, this dynamic is going to show up everywhere you go, so you might as well pick one. Why don't you pick ours? But the third piece, the third piece is this one around not just doing the work, but getting the work, and kind of having faith that if I go through the drill and face my fears, if I do what's required to learn the tasks and practice the tasks and take it on like a rigor or a discipline, that getting out into the marketplace would actually yield what's required. And what I'm noticing, and I'd love to speak very candidly about this, because what I'm noticing in our industry is there are some folks who are very cynical and skeptical, and they're like, yeah, there is no industry anymore. And your best option is a part-time gig if you can land some institutionalized job that you don't hate and you can kind of do the side thing. Or it's reverse, where their main thing is photography, and they do side gigs, whatever. In fact, every educator I know on some level, and myself included, diversifies their revenue streams on some level by educating. It's a strategic move. And hopefully they're good at it. I mean, that's pretty important too. But in that, what is just your honest opinion based on all these pretty amazing success stories you've come through and taught you and taught others, stuff that you've just seen as a practicing photographer in the industry yourself? What's your take on the state of the industry and the viability of people getting the work if they do all those other pieces?
So another book that I'm going to throw out there is something called The Soul of Money, and it's by an author named Lynn Twist. And this book I read, maybe it's been 2 years now, but it changed my perspective and my attitude towards money in a huge way. And I think that the philosophy in the book is that there is an abundance. And when we look at the industry as one of scarcity, that we are fighting each other for jobs, that we are, say you're a newborn photographer in a particular town, and you feel like you are in competition, and that you're always going at things as if you're competing against, the newborn photographer down the road. That there's this aspect of that being a factor in your success. And if you look at it with an attitude of there is an abundance and there's enough to go around. Skip Cohen was just on Creative Live this past weekend, and we were talking about there's a new baby born in the U.S. every, 8 times a minute or something. There is an abundance of
babies.
There's an abundance of children. There's an abundance of pets, weddings, and so again, it comes back to, for me, people's attitudes about that. And so I truly believe that the industry is viable. And everybody has to mold with how any industry changes, and you have to adjust. But for me, it comes back full circle to those other aspects, the personal, the doing the work, the technical. And I've seen a ton of success stories of not just the working professional educators that come on Creative Live, but the participants themselves. And that's the really cool part.
Well, it's funny. Like, I appreciate what Skip's saying about there's a lot of work out there to go get, and there's also, I'm curious what you think about this. My bias is that there's also a uniqueness to every person going and getting the work. That indeed, we just had Jeff and Aaron Youngren on today or earlier today, and they were talking about how they do this workshop where they help people find this precise target market and identify it really clearly. And in these workshops where it's all wedding photographers or all portrait artists or whatever, everyone's so shocked when they have such different targets, when they get really kind of crystal clear on it. And the nuances aren't just subtle; they're like radically different folks that they're going to go attract. And once they get that kind of clarity, they go after it. But I think if folks don't have clarity about who they're going after, they don't have clarity and real confidence about who they are and their work, things get foggy pretty quick.
Absolutely, and that is a huge part of the business aspect of photography world, and marketing and building your brand, and again, that target, having a statement. I have a background of product marketing and brand marketing, and it doesn't matter if you're marketing potato chips or yourself as an artist, as a professional, is narrowing down to a single statement of who that target is. We talk about that a lot at Creative Live, and that adds to your ability to see that there is an abundance. That's, Jasmine Starr talks a lot about attack and repel, and Jasmine Starr is not for everyone. Bambi is not for everyone. Every photographer that we've had has their unique personality that attracts a certain customer and client to them. And that then comes back to being confident, identifying who you are, being confident in it, having your style match that. And those are definitely the elements of being successful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase of the attitude that you have about yourself is what I heard you say a moment ago. It seems critical. Like, another way that I've heard it said a lot is the story you tell yourself about yourself has more of a impact on what you're going to accomplish or not accomplish than what's actually out there. And if I tell myself I'm a loser, well, guess what I'm going to be. But the challenge with that is it can, like, even as the words are coming out of my mouth, there are some people who are rolling their eyes right now and just going like, oh gosh, are you kidding? Like, is this like Yes Man with that movie? Or like, it can sound a little bit trite, like, okay, so if I just believe it, then it'll be there. And that's not what we're saying. That's
not what we're saying. And thank you for clarifying that, because what we're saying is that what you do have to kind of state what you want it to be, but it goes back to having to do the work too.
Yeah,
and so it's not just thinking it.
Right. It's not some magic wand. And it's so funny. I as folks are at home, I'm just so curious if you're at home and you're listening to this, are you pausing long enough to really ask yourself, what do I think about where I really am? Do I have a reality check? Is there a sense of objectivity to my assessment? Could I actually have other people speak candidly, fiercely to what I am and who I am and what my opportunities are if I were to go and do that work? Another guest who's on in a few weeks is a woman by the name of Sosa Stone, and Amanda is a remarkable she's an editor, but she's an agent, and she has a lot of work for things, and she knows she's seen it all in the industry, and she tells these amazing stories. Do you know Amanda?
I don't know her personally, no.
Yeah, well, she's wonderful, but she is what's wonderful about her, I think, is how gracious she is when she's talking to a photographer who's showing a portfolio and they just aren't up to snuff, and she'll say, hey, you're not there, and if you do this, this, and this over the next 24 months, can just map it out, walk it out, do this, guess where you'll be. And the work is hard, brutal. It's terrifying. It's like putting yourself out there and getting nitpicked and judged and all rejected. But what she keeps saying is and if you have talent, and if you do the work, and you do it again, and you do it again, in 24 months, you won't believe how far along you are. Or that old adage of she didn't say this, but I've heard it before, people underestimate what they can do in 2 years and overestimate what they can do in one. And I'm saying this as a guy who wrote a book called Fast Track Photographer. It might just be that the fastest track really is the patient one, where you do hard work, you get over yourself, and you get after it. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. I really like the piece about getting over yourself. Because that's a huge lesson to learn as well, is that within that fear of failure, within those rejections, is on the reverse is the fear of success, the fear of ego, and so getting over yourself is definitely I think key.
Well, Ken, I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And by the way, if any of you guys are at home and you've been around this Fast Track Coaching for a while, you've seen some of our incredible guests, maybe you've gone to our popular replays list, and really, like I said at the top of this conversation, this dialogue is very brief. It's 30 minutes, basically a quick snapshot. We've had some really cool guests. I'm thinking of Jeremy Cowart and Zack Arias and a ton of Tamara Lackey and Lindsay Adler and Penny de Los Santos, all these really cool people who, by chance, also happen to have gone to Creative Live and spent 70 million hours really going in depth about these things. My advice is if you connect with any of those folks in our little conversation, go to Creative Live, spend the $100 or whatever it is because it's on replay, or if they come back around, I know Tamara's coming back up this summer, take advantage of it. And lean into these folks that you connect with and you think you have a resonance with, because I have a hunch taking what they're going to say and going and taking action could be really exciting. So
yeah, I think it's that Creative Live is a place where you can get the education and get the inspiration and then go act. And those three things combined, there you go.
That's great.
So,
well,
thank you so much, Dane. It's been a pleasure.
It's been all mine actually. And tell Craig he's got another guy that's got to get over himself and get on my show, and even that Jarvis fella, you got to tell him to get on here too. So
Will do,
right.
Dane.
All right, thanks again. And by the way, if anyone at Creative Live is one option, but how do they follow you, Kenna? How can they connect to you?
Okay, so my Twitter handle is @Kenna K Photo.
So KENNAK photo with a PH.
And that's my website as well.
Okay.
Is KennaKPhoto.com.
Excellent.
And everything falls from there.
Awesome.
Kenna K Photo.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, friend, and we'll see you all next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.